Welcome to Washington Today from Monday, October 9th, 2023. I'm Gary Starkoff. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. President Biden has put out a statement about Americans killed by Hamas in Israel and also those being held hostage, saying, quote, "Sadly, we now know that at least 11 American citizens were among those killed, many of whom made a second home in Israel. The safety of American citizens, whether at home or abroad, is my top priority as president." We'll hear more from the president's statement in about a minute. Meanwhile, Israel's defense ministry says it has ordered, quote, "a complete siege of Gaza, cutting off electricity, food, fuel, and water, and pounding the region with airstrikes." And in the eastern Mediterranean, the U.S. Navy is positioning its newest, most advanced carrier, the USS Gerald R. along with a strike group that includes 4 guided missile destroyers and several F-35 fighter jets in support of Israel. All of this comes as the House of Representatives continues without a permanent speaker, which effectively paralyzes Congress from authorizing additional aid to Israel. The House's former Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, he held a press conference at the Capitol today. He offered a 5-point plan to help support Israel and criticized the Biden administration for its handling of Iran. More now from the president's statement as he said, quote, "The safety of American citizens, whether at home or abroad, is my top priority as president. While we are still working to confirm, we believe it is likely that American citizens may be among those being held by Hamas. I have directed my team to work with their Israeli counterparts on every aspect of the hostage crisis, including sharing intelligence and deploying experts from across the United States government to consult with and advise Israeli counterparts on hostage recovery efforts. The United States and State of Israel are inseparable partners, and I affirmed to Prime Minister Netanyahu again when we spoke yesterday that the United States will continue to make sure Israel has what it needs to defend itself and its people." You can read the entire statement from the president at whitehouse.gov. On Capitol Hill, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy talked about the situation in Israel. He said the Hamas militants who carried out the surprise attack were emboldened by the President Biden's, quote, "policy of appeasement toward Iran."
President Biden's number one priority right now must be finding out how many Americans have been taken hostage and get them home. From last night to this morning, the number of American deaths have doubled from 4 to 9. This administration must also make clear that harming any American will result in the wrath of the United States. We cannot repeat what happened in Afghanistan. It must be clear that we do not negotiate with terrorists and no American will be left behind. Biden's policy on appeasement, including money for hostage deals, must come to an end. His policy has only emboldened terrorists, and handing over $6 billion to Iran only helps the cause. In explaining that to members of Congress, they said they had provisions to refreeze the money if Iran has done something wrong. They should freeze the money back today.
The former speaker also talked about whether the situation in Israel gives any urgency to House Republicans to choose a speaker soon.
Well, let's be honest about our conference, all right? Is our conference just going to select somebody to try to throw them out in another 35 days if 8 people don't get 100% of what they want and 96% of the conference does? Is these 8 people upset because in a debt ceiling we got the greatest reduction in spending in American history? We got work requirements. We got reform to NEPA where we could build things in America, and 2/3 of the conference voted for it? Or they got more than the majority vote for to keep government open? Would they weather, as they sat on the floor and said we should have shut the government down, that these same people led the charge to stop us from passing any appropriation bills, to even shutting Congress all down for an entire week of any bill they want because they didn't get what they want, and then not even to pass a continuing resolution that would secure our borders and cut government, and then blame me because they worked with every single Democrat because we kept government open? It's not just electing somebody that's new. It's whether you want to be a conservative who will govern. That's the question the conference has to realize. And for the idea that you allow 8 people to continue to do that with no consequences, no one's going to be successful.
And he was also asked if he envisions a scenario in which he could be a candidate in this week's scheduled speaker elections, if he would accept a colleague nominating him, or if he thinks he is the right person to lead the House, given his pro-Israel background.
Look, this is about a moment in time. This is about what America's going to do. Could you imagine if we were sitting here and we listened further to a Gates and Mace, that we were in a shutdown? That as we asked our 30,000 men and women in the military in the Middle East to defend us without being paid, that the question around the world of what was happening here today, that's a decision by the conference. I'll allow the conference to make whatever decision. Whether I'm speaker or not, I'm a member of this body. I know what history has had, and I can lead in any position it is. And right now, I realize we need these 5 actions taken now and stop delaying.
You can see all of Kevin McCarthy's news conference at cspan.org. Meanwhile, another member of Congress, New York Representative Dan Goldman, is talking about his experience in Israel over the weekend. He was there with his wife and daughters for a family event.
We were in Tel Aviv, where we were supposed to be for the weekend in a hotel. Got woken up at 6:30 in the morning by sirens. We were obviously aware of the reality on the ground in Israel that sirens will go off. You have in Tel Aviv about 90 seconds to get to a shelter. Obviously, if you're further in the south, you have much less time. But I had never heard it before. My kids obviously had no idea what was going on. So we woke up and we sort of scrambled and ran to the stairwell on Saturday morning. That happened several more times as rocket fire was coming towards Tel Aviv. It happened again in the evening. So, you know, I was lucky enough to jump online and I got a flight out yesterday. But we were supposed to come back today, and many flights have been canceled. It's just unfathomable. Yeah. Our experience was traumatic, but of course it is nothing compared to so many Israelis down in the south just massacred with barbarism that we have not seen.
Yeah, on a personal level, you experienced a touch of it. I want to ask you, as a congressman who obviously covers and follows these issues, I mean, unfathomable is the word that keeps coming to my mind. I mean, Israel is known for having one of the most vaunted and fearsome military and intelligence apparatuses in the world. And somehow, not only is it an intelligence failure, but then once these fighters pour over the borders, the military bases were overrun. And are you shocked by this?
It is definitely surprising. I was there with a congressional delegation in August, and we got, briefings about how prepared, how the intelligence works, how Iron Dome works. I did not expect to be experiencing how Iron Dome works, which you could hear the missiles intercepting the rockets above. But this is, I think, what is most important right now, both in the Congress and around this country, is that we have to stand with Israel against this barbaric terrorism. That is what it was. It is as bad or worse than ISIS, Al-Qaeda, what they did to those concert goers in just indiscriminately massacring people on a field, taking Holocaust survivors in wheelchairs, as kidnapping, killing children. It is unconscionable and inhuman. And we, as Americans who oppose terrorism of all sorts, must stand with our ally Israel in order to support them and so that they can protect their borders and make their country secure.
Dan Goldman is a Democrat who represents New York's 10th congressional district, which includes Lower Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn. He also called for unity in support of Israel.
We in Congress must rally together. And you mentioned at the beginning of this that we don't have a Speaker of the House. We cannot actually do business. So
do you think that will thwart what Congress is able to do in terms of supporting Israel?
Ultimately, no, because I hope not, because the administration has the authorities it needs right now to provide the support. But we have to replenish Iron Dome. We have to be able to expand them. If, as Jeremy said, rockets start coming from Hezbollah in the north and more Hamas in the south, and even if this were to expand into the West Bank, Iron Dome can be overwhelmed. And that is a huge priority. I witnessed it up close, how essential and effective it is. It is the greatest defense system that we know in order to literally, with radar heat-seeking missiles, essentially intercept rockets that would otherwise be going at Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, wherever. So that is really what our focus has to be. And I hope the Republicans will get their act in order so that we can move forward and provide the support that Israel needs.
That's New York Democrat Dan Goldman speaking to New York One Spectrum News. In South Korea today, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called on Chinese President Xi Jinping for stronger support for Israel. He is in Asia leading a bipartisan congressional delegation. He released part of his statement to Chinese officials on X.
The ongoing events in Israel over the past few days are horrific. I urge you and the Chinese people to stand with the Israeli people and condemn these cowardly and vicious attacks. 250 young people gathered at a dance, and the Hamas terrorists took machine guns and shot them all dead. I was very disappointed, to be honest, by the Foreign Ministry statement that showed no sympathy or support for Israel during these troubled times.
In response, Chinese Foreign Ministry updated their statement about the weekend's attacks, saying that they condemned, quote, all violence and attacks on civilians. And, quote, the most urgent task now is to reach a ceasefire and restore peace. And in the Wall Street Journal today, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell wrote an op-ed that said in part, quote, there can be no calls for both sides to de-escalate. Israel deserves the time and space to defend itself. Senator McConnell also called for increased sanctions against Iran, who many say played a significant role in planning the attacks. And he goes on to write, quote, the civilized world must impose real costs on terrorists and those who support or condone them. In the days and weeks ahead, the brave people of Israel will continue to reclaim their territory, rescue their countrymen, and mourn the innocent men, women, and children the terrorists have slaughtered. They deserve the support of the free world in both word and deed. All of this comes as the House of Representatives is still operating without a permanent speaker. Tomorrow, the House Republican Conference meets to discuss potential candidates with a party vote expected on Wednesday. House Democrats have also announced their plan to again select Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries as their speaker nominee. And Emily Brooks, House reporter for The Hill, talked about what's in front of House members this week as they work to choose a new leader.
Aside from the fact that it's unprecedented, the first time in history that the House has ousted a speaker, the House is also dealing with a lot of other curveballs and trying to figure out who to replace Kevin McCarthy with as Speaker. House Republicans are not only operating on a very condensed timeline, they're trying to elect a new Speaker this week, and that's like very condensed versus even what we saw when former Speaker Boehner left, and there was about a month before that next Speaker's election. So this election is happening on a very condensed timeline. Usually there's a lot of months of jockeying behind the scenes before that actual election leading up to this. And then you have the factor of former President Trump weighing in on the race. And he is, very much still a leader and a player in the Republican Party, holds a lot of sway. It's unclear whether he will sway people to support Jim Jordan for Speaker over Steve Scalise, the Majority Leader. But just the fact that he weighed in, usually we don't see presidential candidates weighing in on House leadership elections there. And then, of course, you had this interesting scenario where Fox News was going to host what they called a joint interview with the candidates for Speaker, and that was announced on Friday, but very quickly there were Republican members who said that they didn't think that was a good idea. They wanted to hear from the candidates first, and then the candidates pulled out of that, and that was just sort of highlighting the interesting, unusual nature of this and how much of a national spectacle it's becoming.
We've now gone to two major candidates, Representative Jordan, like you said, Representative Scalise. Do you have a sense of where the conference is about overwhelming support for either of those men?
Well, both of them are getting a lot of endorsements. I would say Jim Jordan is getting a lot of support from his fellow Ohio members, a lot of his fellow members of the House Freedom Caucus, of which he was the founding chairman. And Steve Scalise is getting a lot of support from the South and many other members. They're both powerhouses in the Republican Party, and a lot of them, and both of them bring different flavors of leadership. But right now, there are some members who were talking to reporters last week saying that they think that this is far from settled. They don't think either one of them has enough support to win on the House floor right now. And that is one reason why Republicans are very intent on trying to settle this internally within the Republican conference before heading to the House floor and potentially having another multi-ballot public speakership election. They don't want a repeat of what happened in January. They want to figure that out behind closed doors first.
Emily Brooks, Representative Jordan was on the Sunday shows yesterday, made the case for himself about the support he thinks he seems to be getting. We'll show you a little bit of that and then get your response to it.
Steve Scalise is also asking colleagues for their support. Can you give us a sense of whether or not you feel you have those votes?
We've got amazing feedback and incredible feedback from our colleagues across the country, across the spectrum in the Republican conference. I mean, we got conservatives to what's termed more moderate members. We got 3 committee chairmen for me. I feel very good about that support. And again, I think it boils down to those fundamental questions. Who can unite our conference? Who can bring us together so that we can lead for the American people? And then who can go tell the country what we're doing here, what the things we're working on, the things that matter to them and how it matters to them, how it impacts them and their family. Yeah. That's what we're supposed to do in politics. We're supposed to do what we told the people we were going to do. We're supposed to focus on them and help them, their families, their communities. That's our job. That's what we need to focus on.
And so, Emily Brooks, that's Representative Jordan selling himself, so to speak, on the air. Factor that into what you might see play out this week.
Yeah, so both candidates are pitching themselves as someone who can unite the conference and unify the conference, which is something Republicans are definitely looking for. So Jim Jordan, he is an interesting character to think about getting so much support right now, particularly when you think about a couple years ago, back in 2015 and 2018, when he was sort of challenging House leadership a lot more. Since then, he's become a lot more of a useful ally of House leadership. He stood by former Speaker McCarthy throughout his speakership race and throughout the challenges here. And right now, you're seeing even at least one moderate that I can think of supporting Jim Jordan for Speaker. So he has definitely shifted. He's not so much of a gadfly anymore, and that is definitely something that he's trying to portray there in that interview.
Emily Brooks, House reporter for The Hill. You can see more at cspan.org/Washington Journal and on the C-SPAN Now free mobile video app. You're listening to Washington Today.
The office of Speaker of the House of the United States House of Representatives is hereby declared vacant.
On Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, the House Republican Conference meets to discuss potential candidates for Speaker of the House following Congressman Kevin McCarthy's removal, with a party vote expected on Wednesday morning. And the House Democrats have announced their plan to again select Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries as their nominee for Speaker. Stay with C-SPAN as the battle over House speakership continues. Follow every moment from Capitol Hill as this historic election unfolds. Watch on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or online at cspan.org. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Campaign 2024 news now. Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley has told Fox News today that she's raised more than $11 million in the past 3 months. That's an increase from the $7.3 million she reported in the year's second quarter. Another Republican candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, is saying he may opt out of the next Republican presidential primary debate, which is scheduled for November 8th in Miami. Campaign spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin told USA Today that the campaign is having internal discussions about whether The candidate should participate in the debate and any future ones, with former President Donald Trump skipping them so far. On Saturday, Vivek Ramaswamy was stumping in Keene, New Hampshire.
The first dirty little secret in the federal government is that the people who we elect to run the government are no longer the ones who actually run the government. And that means that we need to get in there, take that fourth branch of government, that administrative state, the shadow government in those three-letter agencies, and finally shut it down. This is how you get in there and actually drain the swamp. And for me, this is more than a slogan. This is about how are we actually going to do it. If I can't be your next president for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, by the way, then neither should those federal bureaucrats who are reporting into me either. 8-year term limits for the bureaucracy instead of those civil service protections. That is how you drain the swamp and end the corruption. And no lobbying for 10 years until after you leave as well. When there are government agencies that should not or no longer exist, from the FBI to the ATF to the CDC to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to the U.S. Department of Education, we're not just going to put figureheads on top and say, hey, reform it and figure it out. We have to be willing to get in there and actually shut them down. That is how you revive the integrity of a constitutional republic.
Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy speaking in Keene, New Hampshire over the weekend. And on the Democratic side, the field just got a little smaller. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced today that he is dropping his bid for the Democratic presidential nomination to instead become an independent.
Something is stirring in us that says it doesn't have to be this way. People stop me everywhere at airports, at hotels and malls, on the street, and they remind me that this country is ready for a history-making change. They are ready to reclaim their freedom, their independence. And
I saw that and I thought, is that an assassin?
And that's why I'm here today. I'm here to declare myself an independent candidate. Candidate for President of the United States. That's not all. I'm here to join you in making a new Declaration of Independence for our entire nation. We declare independence from the corporations that have hijacked our government. And we declare independence from Wall Street, from big tech, from big pharma, from big ag, from the military contractors and their lobbyists. And we declare independence from the mercenary media that is here to fortify all of the corporate orthodoxies from their advertisers and to urge us to hate our neighbors and to fear our friends.
Campaign spokespeople told CNN that they will host a series of events in Texas, Florida, and Georgia later this month. You can get more Campaign 2024 coverage at cspan.org. Finally, tonight is episode 4 of our series, Books That Shaped America. In partnership with the Library of Congress, we're exploring 10 books from American literature that provoked thought, won awards, led to significant societal changes, and are still talked about today. Tonight, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. Written in 1845, it was the first of 3 autobiographies written by Frederick Douglass. In deeply personal and sometimes graphic language, he describes his childhood years on the eastern shore of Maryland, his time as a slave in Baltimore, and his escape to the North in 1838. And today I want to remind you about our series companion podcast for Books That Shaped America. Series producer Paul Orgel is here to talk about the podcast and tell us how it's different from what'll be seen tonight on C-SPAN.
The podcast is designed in general to be more of a life story of the author of a book, not just the book itself, but the scope of that person's life from their early years and right through until their deaths and everything that they accomplished in between. But David Blight wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book several years ago. It was called Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. And he talked to us on the podcast in great detail about the various aspects of the life of Frederick Douglass, how he learned to read when he was sent to Baltimore for the first time in his life, his second return to Baltimore as a young man, as a slave, and the trouble that he got into with people who were jealous of him, who took they thought he was taking their job away from them on the docks in Baltimore. This led up in part to his escape to the north. Mr. Blight also got into great detail about Douglass's later life, his relationship with President Abraham Lincoln, the disputes that they had over how fast this process of abolition was going, or how slow this process was going in Douglass's view. So they had rather difficult conversations. Douglass around the country was making his strong argument for abolition, as you know. And then we talked about his later life. He lived several decades after he escaped to freedom, and he did a lot, as you know. He was an orator. He was a statesman. He served in the government. He was a newspaper publisher in his own right. So lots of interesting detail on the life of Frederick Douglass from Mr. Blight.
Anything that was surprising or not widely known that you remember him talking about?
Gosh, what really strikes me again is that level of detail that he got into. Just listening to the stories that Blight told about the docks in Baltimore and his pursuit of abolition, his time with Lincoln was something that really, really struck me.
Next week's episode features The Common Law by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Who are we going to have on about talk about that podcast?
It's going to be Stephen Budiansky, Gary. He is an author. He's an historian. He wrote a full biography of Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. Just a couple of years ago, and got into some really interesting detail about that man's life. The most interesting thing that Mr. Budiansky said was that it was really hard to channel Holmes Jr., track his life, because he lived so long, and he did so much. So it's going to be Mr. Budiansky.
All right, Paul Orgel, producer of Books That Shaped America and our companion podcast on the TV show. We're looking forward to the show tonight.
Thanks, Gary.
And here's a preview of what you can hear on our companion podcast about Frederick Douglass.
At what age did he actually learn to read and write? Who helped him? And was there an actual point during that period where he knew that his writing and speaking ability might ultimately provide him a ticket to freedom?
Yeah, I love that question. The first part's easier. He really learns his alphabet and the use of language, for reading at least, from his white mistress, the wife of Hugh Auld in Baltimore, when he's about 8 years old. She, as soon as he arrives there, he's living in the home of the Aulds. He's supposed to be the companion playmate for the Auld boy. And she teaches him to read and write for more than a year and a half. She reads out loud with him. She teaches him the alphabet. He takes to it like manna from heaven. He clearly had a skill with it. He started collecting newspapers when he found them. He would collect anything that he could try to read. She read the Bible out loud with him. I mean, the first language he hears is not from a child's reader, but from the Bible. So he's very early on getting the King James language in his mind. That's where he begins. Now, when exactly did he begin to realize that this power with words, whether oratorical or written, and it was certainly oratorical first, that's happening even before he escapes from slavery. Because, for example, by the time he is, he's about 18 when he's hired out to a farm owned by a man named Freeland. And on Sundays or days off, he gathers a group. He calls them his band of brothers. He gathers a group of apparently mostly guys, enslaved very young men or teenagers or even younger boys out in under trees in a brush arbor, and he preaches to them.
You can find the Books That Shaped America companion podcast at cspan.org/podcasts. It's also available on the podcast tab of the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. You can also find it wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And that's also where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also search YouTube for Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our free daily email, word for word. Go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy. From Washington and across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, the Brookings Institution Governance Studies Senior Fellow Molly Reynolds and the Hill's Editor-in-Chief Bob Cusack discuss the speaker battle triggered by Congressman Kevin McCarthy's removal and what's next for the House of Representatives. Then, the Brookings Institution's Michael O'Hanlon talks about the latest in the Israeli-Hamas conflict and geostrategic fallout. And documentary director and correspondent James Jacoby with his latest PBS Frontline film, Elon Musk's Twitter Takeover. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.